Russia's not tied to 50 days. Russia's not tied to any calendar. There's no calendar pressure on Russia whatsoever. Russia is just going to win, which means every day the commanders get up and deploy their forces, and their goal is to kill as many Ukrainians and push the Ukrainians back as far as they can be pushed that day, out putting too many Russian lives at risk. The strategic front, it appears that Russia has made a decision that they're going to do a full court press on attacking Ukrainian infrastructure and military targets. There's not going to be a period of time where Ukrainian cities get to go weeks without any Russian activity. The Russian intelligence coverage over Ukraine appears to be very tight, meaning when they detect movement, they strike. And they're right now in the business of striking. Every day, 400, 500, 600 drones fly in. There's nothing to shoot them down. Then they're followed by precision strike weapons. There's nothing that can shoot them down either. And the Russians are just grinding Ukraine away. And they will continue to do this until Ukraine no longer exists or the Ukraine accepts surrender on Russia's terms. The Poles may know something about what's going on inside Ukraine. Seymour Hersh believes that Zelensky will either be thrown into exile or be compelled to leave internally or externally. Europe, in terms of security, is linked to NATO, and NATO is dominated by the United States. Literally, Europe is an adult child that's never been allowed to grow up. It doesn't know how to function. They can throw a temper tantrum. It's, again, I take a look at France, Germany, and the United Kingdom now getting together and we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. Well, that's a lot like the 50-year-old kid getting together with his friends in a bar saying, I'm going to declare independence. I'm going to go off and do this. Meanwhile, he's buying beer with the money that daddy gave him to buy beer. And he's going to get back in his car and drive home in the car that mommy bought him. And he's going to go back and living in the basement of the parents' house. There's nothing serious about Europe nowadays. Literally. They're not adults. They're children pretending to be adults. And if the United States actually pulled the plug, they would collapse and wouldn't know what to do. I think chaos is what we're going to see out of the Trump administration. First of all, to avoid chaos, you have to have systems in place for policy coordination. That's normally the way things have operated the last couple of decades. A strong national security advisor at the head of a strong national security council. If you've seen over the course of years the growth of the National Security Council, you start with Kissinger, a very small group, and you go up, and each presidency seems to expand the size of the National Security Council. Trump was betrayed by the National Security Council in his first presidency. If you go back to Alexander Vindman, who was on the NSC staff and coordinating with Ciarello, the CIA asset, Trump doesn't trust the National Security Council structure. He feels that he was betrayed by it. So this time around, Trump also early on, he had to fire, I think it was Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor, because Waltz was doing his own thing, which is something Trump always fears out of the National Security Council. So now you have Marco Rubio dual-hatted. This is a horrible thing. It's constitutionally questionable whether or not he can do that, because as the National Security Advisor, he works for the president. That's the best the British have, trick play. That's it. They don't have fundamentals. I think they've taken a page out of Vladimir Putin's book, to be honest, where Putin will say, oh, we want to have negotiations. We want to have discussions. We'll sit down at the table, send a team right now to talk to you, but we're not going to change anything we're doing on the battlefield. That's just the reality of the way it is. And I think the Iranians right now are saying, we're willing to talk with the West, with the United States, but we don't trust your negotiations because you screwed us over. We got to figure that one out. Oh, we're willing to work with the I, just not grossly or the way it's currently configured. We got to work that one out too. I think that's what's happening here. What they're doing is they're making sure all doors are left open, not to provide any excuse for not having a diplomatic off-ramp. But it also appears that are very unified and solidified in their position on where Iran is and where Iran's going and what Iran will accept. A lot of the decision-making now has been taken out of the hands of the foreign ministry, the presidency, and the atomic energy, and put into the Supreme National Security Council. Now, the president sits at the head of that. There's no doubt about that, not held accountable to Congress. But as the Secretary of State, having been ratified by the Senate, he's responsible to the Senate. They can summon him in. And so now Rubio can just decide, am I advising the president, Secretary of State, or am I advising the president of the National Security Council? Henry Kissinger is the only other person that had that kind of strength, and he himself recognized the constitutional limitations of this. But the other thing is that the State Department is downsizing. You saw they fired 1,300 some odd staffers. Many of them came from the Intelligence Bureau. They were fired. Why? Because, gosh, they have opinions. They represent the permanent bureaucracy of people who have inherited policies from previous administrations, and their job is to keep those policies going in a relatively consistent manner. Trump doesn't want to do that. He wants to have his own policies. So they've gutted the State Department. The National Security Council is dysfunctional, almost non-existent in the role that it plays. There is no structure of policy coordination. And as a result, policies tend to be made in a very knee-jerk reaction by the president. And if anything, the National Security Council then backfills and works with, but normally the president in a meeting will say something. And it's one of the great tragedies of what's happening right now, the absolute indifference. It's like we're watching, instead of seeing reality, it's almost as if we're watching reality TV. It's entertainment. And there's a certain genre of film that are designed to shock people and scare people. And that's what's happening here. This is tragic. It disgusts me. It sickens me. But what do you do when you're confronted with a world that collectively has no conscience? None whatsoever. And I also, if you recall, warned people. They said, oh, man, we need Hezbollah to come in. I said, no, you don't. Because the second Hezbollah comes in, you got a different conflict with other people dying. It'll steal the show because it's fresher. It's different. Dead Lebanese? That's new. Let's look at dead Lebanese. We're tired of looking at dead Gazans. We've seen that film before. And now we have Syria falling apart. They're shooting Druze. We got videos of Druze being gunned down as let's see that. That's really cool. That's interesting. We haven't seen that before because we're tired of seeing dead Lebanese and dead Gazans. This is the perversity of the human condition, where we have made death so normal, so utterly normal, that we forget how horrible it is. Hind Rajab should have brought tears to everybody's eyes, but there's a freaking 20 Hind Rajabs dying a day in Gaza right now. China's already said that they won't yield, that they'll use whatever resources they have to strike back. Brazil has said, if you don't want to do business with us, then we won't do business with you. India is the weak link, but India has to be careful because they could find themselves on the losing side of a supply chain war with China. And that would crush the Indian economy. The United States isn't willing to step up right now and bail India out of any economic problems it gets into because it blindly follows American diktat. There's no guarantee that India will do this, but there's also no guarantee that Trump's going to do this. Lindsey Graham doesn't have any decision-making capabilities. He's one senator in a United States Senate that has already punted to this president. The only decision-making authority is with the president. It appears that the president is simply using Lindsey Graham's tariff threat as a political shield behind which to hide the fact that they have no real policy regarding Russia and to buy time for them to try and shape the battlefield, so to speak. I think they want Zelensky gone. They need him removed, and they want to replace him with somebody that might be able to make the concessions necessary to get the Russians to the negotiating table. Zelensky's afraid of this. Look at, all of a sudden, Zelensky wants to talk to Russia now. These will be people that will be trying to prevent the French, the Germans, and the British dictating things. But then there's the Eastern Bloc nations, plus the two new nations, Finland and Sweden, which consider themselves to be frontline states, and they'll have their own position. And the West isn't willing to back up the East. They're not going to let the East dictate terms of coexistence, meaning the East says we have to be positioned to go to war against Russia. The West, I think, will say, no, we need to be positioned to defend ourselves, and we'll plan accordingly. So you'll have three different schools of thought in NATO splitting apart. Unless you have Daddy there, here's where Mark Rutte was correct. Daddy has to come in and bap, 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 line up. This is what we're going to do. Without America, NATO just falls apart. And NATO can't afford it. They can't sustain it. There'll be no discipline. There'll be nothing. Just a bunch of bickering children. That's the future of NATO, which is why, as I said before, it's probably best just to get rid of NATO, kick the United States out of Europe, and deal with European security issues on their own. They need to have a European Union defense agreement. But the problem is the European Union itself is not viable. It's falling apart. But Turkey's got a big problem because a large part of HTS are these Turkic peoples that come in from the Uyghurs and the Uzbeks and everybody who's coming from Central Asia who are there now, tens of thousands of them with families, women and children. What do you do with that? We created a nightmare. Bashar al-Assad held this dysfunctional fake state together because Syria is always a dysfunctional fake state. Manufactured, Sykes-Picot, draw lines on a map, fake, put in a Hashemite king. The Ba'athist Party was the logical reaction to this to try and bring these things together. And yet we declared war on Baathism when we declared war on Bashar al-Assad, and we finally got rid of him. And now we're paying the price. And the same thing in Iraq. Iraq is a dysfunctional state. Can we come up with something positive to talk about? Because this is about as depressing as it gets. Yeah. That shows a deep penetration of the Iranian security mechanisms. Has Iran rooted all that out, solved those problems? I don't know. But I think the fact that the Israelis are so aggressive on this, there's other tricks. If I were the Iranians, I'd be very concerned about cyber penetration. We know that the United States, back in the Stuxnet area, was working on a follow-on virus. I can't remember the new Zeus or something of that nature that takes control of all of the infrastructure, the ability to turn on and off traffic lights, to shut down electricity, to create chaos and sow confusion. Is there a death switch the Israelis can hit the second time around that shuts down Iran? Has Iran solved that problem? It's a big gamble for Israel because the one thing we know is that the Israelis haven't solved the Iranian ballistic missile problem, and that whatever punches Israel plans on delivering, Iran is now prepared to engage using a higher caliber missile force. That Iran has absorbed the lessons of this conflict. We saw over the course of the conflict, their ability to penetrate Iranian air defenses increased as the war went on. They developed greater sophistication in their attacks when they started to deploy more advanced weapon systems. The Germans have for so long forgotten what it means to be German and instead focused on what they thought they had become, which is the largest, most powerful bank of Europe. It's superficial to say this, but I'll say it anyways. I don't think the Germans love being German. In fact, I think a lot of Germans resent being German for a number of reasons. And they're posturing in a way that they believe the United States wants them to posture. And this is dangerous. It's dangerous not only for Germany in terms of the lack of sovereignty. The fact that, remember, Olaf Scholz stood in the White House while Joe Biden threatened to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline and didn't say a word. My God, if I were a German leader, I would have put my fist down on the table and said, you will never do that. If you do that, it's an act of war. We will literally take over the bases, capture all your personnel, and declare war on you. You will not attack Germany. Germany alone makes a decision about its energy policy, its major energy infrastructure. If you have concerns, you can come and talk to me. I was just here, but you don't get to stand up and tell the world you're going to attack a major piece of German infrastructure and expect me to be silent. That would have been a German leader. Instead, Scholz was silent. Why? Because Germany doesn't know how to behave without American leadership. Why would Russia give the United States that power? What has the United States done to earn that power? Russia's not going to complicate things. Russia's made it clear what their goals and objectives are. And it's an issue of Ukraine and Russia's relationship with Ukraine, not of the United States suddenly stepping in after. It's just like the arsonist sets the building on fire. And then when the fire department comes and says, I'll tell you how to fight the fire. No, you set it on fire. Get the hell out of the way. The United States set Ukraine on fire. So why do they now get to come to the table and start dictating anything? The United States is in no position to dictate. And I don't think Russia's in the business of listening to America dictate. What Russia would like to do is work through Ukraine to get to the other issues that they should be discussing with the United States. Strategic arms reduction, the resumption of economic benefits, the normalization of diplomatic relations. These are things that should be discussed. But Ukraine, Russia's already made it clear what their Ukrainian position is, and that's what's frustrating to Trump, is that he's confronted now with the reality that Russia is not listening to him because he doesn't matter. He's irrelevant, especially when what are Trump's real motivations here? He wants credit for stopping the war. And so this becomes an existential struggle, something that Netanyahu has been trying to get a long time. He's finally been able to get the United States to bomb Iran. That's something he wanted a long time ago. It may not have been exactly what he wanted, but I think that Professor Morandi is 100% correct. I think there will be a continuation of this conflict. What Israel gave up a couple very valuable resources to strike Iran this time in an effort to achieve regime change. I understand that's what they were trying to do. They failed. They gave up a program that was at least 10 years old of deploying these drone factories into Iran. We don't know the extent to which these drones have been cleaned up by the Iranians. There was a story in the Iranian press, I don't know if it's just done for propaganda purposes, of the thief that broke into a home and found a drone factory and called in the cops and said, "I'm a thief. I broke in, but I have to report what I've seen." That could just be a story, but the point is, if it's true, that means there's still capability resident inside Iran to carry out the kind of drone attacks that frustrated the Iranians in the last conflict. The other thing that the Israelis gave up was the ability to fly out to the Caspian Sea and hit Tehran coming out of the Caspian Sea. And increasingly, it's becoming a nation that, if it's not brought under control by the German people, will be a nation that I've often likened Ukraine to a rabid dog that needs to be shot, taking a cue out of To Kill a Mockingbird in the role play by Atticus Finch, and shooting a rabid dog that was terrorizing the streets of the town. Germany's about to become a rabid dog too. And maybe we need an American Atticus Finch to put the German rabid dog down once and for all, because the third time's a charm. Germany's already done this a couple times. They shouldn't be allowed to do it again. The Syrian Ba'athist Party was a glue that held it together. Imperfectly, but it held it together, seeking to streamline and simplify and get rid of these. But you remove Bashar al-Assad without a plan, and what you brought in was Al-Qaeda, whose only plan is violence. And this was inevitable. I said it from day one. This is what's going to happen. It doesn't take anybody by surprise who studied Syria, who knows Syria, just those dreamers who thought, oh, no, this is okay. This is fine. Everything will be okay. It won't be okay, because there's no such thing as a singularity of votes. The Druze have different factions. The Shia have different factions. The Sunnis have different factions. What is ISIS in Syria? People tend to forget that the majority of the ISIS fighters that fought for ISIS were Syrian tribal people. Yes, they brought in the foreigners, but at the end of the day, it was the ability of ISIS to take advantage of the dysfunction of the Syrian government, the dislocation of Syrian power, to exploit the vacuum, to go into the Bedouin tribes and recruit the Bedouin tribes and make them part of that, what's led to the massive expansion into Anbar. Similar things, Arab Bedouin tribes moving into Tikrit region through Mosul. That's what made ISIS work. And ISIS, at the end of the day, is an ideology that thrives in a vacuum. What is Syria today? A vacuum. Buy the weapon twice. That's what we're telling Europe. Hey, you already bought one of those Patriots from us? Give it to the Ukrainians and buy another one to replace it. And that's our contribution to the war. It's a scam. It's a grift. It's a con, which means he's not serious. And so I think at some point in time, once you remove Ukraine from the equation, Donald Trump will be politically empowered to start making decisions that make sense for the United States. And one of those decisions will be, I think, to move to improve relations with Ukraine and get the United States out of the NATO entanglement. But right now, because Ukraine has become a political hot potato for the president because of his inability to stop the war and therefore seeking to blame Vladimir Putin, he's trapped. He's in the NATO trap. But long term, I don't think neither he nor his like-minded people want to stay in the NATO trap forever. I think that J.D. Vance, potential future president of the United States, isn't enthralled about either Europe or NATO. The Russians are doing the fundamentals on the battlefield. The Russians are doing the fundamentals over the airspace over Ukraine. They're dominating. The Russians are doing the economic fundamentals. All England has is trick plays. You don't win games with trick plays. That's the bottom line. Yeah, you have to take them seriously. But what he's done with Ukraine is buy into a policy that allows him to wrap himself in the European Union flag. And he's trying to wrap himself in the American flag as well, to say that this is a common cause, a united cause, a just cause around which we must rally and make sacrifices, and then use the concept of sacrifices as the excuse for failed policy. But I don't think Merz is going to survive much longer. I think the German economy is checking out as we speak. And at some point in time, one can only hope that rational thinking takes hold in Germany, and they evict these people like Merz and others who are willing to sacrifice the German nation for a Eurocentric cause that is not viable, not linked to reality.